Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Marvel guest.
I think it suits me. I like these movies for the most part.
Yeah, they're for the most part, I think they're a lot of fun. Hello, everyone. This is Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
And Tyler Van Fossen, welcome back to the podcast. I don't know what number episode appearance this is for you, but you're a veteran at this point.
I have fully lost count now. It's numerous, and I'm happy to be back again.
Maybe we'll have more fun than Rising Sun. I doubt it, though. I think it'll be more fun to talk about than Never Say Never Again. Although, actually, that was a pretty fun discussion.
You know, not to jump into the episode content so quickly, but I mean, we were just touching on it, and it's true. Like, Tyler is our, I would like to say our official Marvel aficionado guest, right? Like, we need if we were going to do like a live recording with video, we'd want to do that like overlay, like Marvel expert for Tyler.
I don't know if is that pigeonholing myself there? Am I?
We'll throw other things out there too.
Tyler, you're very well read, and Anton, I think I've explained this to you before, but if I already did, it'll be for the listeners' sake. I am not what you would call a comic book fan. I appreciate them, but I've never really read a comic book outside of the very popular ones like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, V for Vendetta. I've read that stuff, but I've never read a Marvel comic book, anything like that. So when the MCU was really starting, Tyler was my just go-to friend expert for all the content. You know, I knew the popular stuff. I knew the popular characters. I knew some of the popular villains. Because, you know, the Marvel characters, they're so big that it's almost impossible not to be aware of Spider-Man and Captain America and Iron Man and whatnot. But if I had like questions about details, like, well, why is this in this movie? Who is Thanos? You know, Tyler was my go-to expert for that.
Right.
Just awesome. I know that listeners at home can't see it, but even my office decor behind me here is the encyclopedia of every Marvel character ever. There's a life-size Thor's hammer back there, and a life-size Infinity Gauntlet all in the background behind me. So I am prepped for this right now.
Yeah. So Tyler,
you're not messing around.
Yeah, Tyler has quite the assortment of weapons ready to almost mimic that of the Maestro, if any comic readers get that reference.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, Tyler knows.
He does, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as the listeners have probably guessed at this point, we are gathered here today to discuss another Marvel film. It's been a while since we've covered one. I think that was probably almost 20 episodes ago at this point, Anton, maybe even more. The last one we covered was Thor. Previously, we covered Iron Man 2. So this is actually really only our third Marvel film. We have a few more on the slate for next season. You know, we got some listener feedback like, you were covering Marvel films. What happened? It's been a while. It's like, don't worry, there's more coming. We promise. But as of today, it's Captain America, the First Avenger. With that being said, Anton, any admin that we want to take care of before we get this rolling?
You know, I'd say we're a few days into the new year. For listeners, this will probably be further into the new year. But with that, just always thank you for following, subscribing, listening to the podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you, and very excited to see where we've been gaining more engagement and follows. So please spread the word, share us with your friends and loved ones. We really, really appreciate any and all efforts to get the word out there about Why Wasn't It Better.
Indeed. And if you are a first-time listener, or if you are a listener who has not yet subscribed and you like what you hear, please do so. Give us a follow, give us a like, give us a subscription. Every follower counts. We really do appreciate it. And with that being said, I think we can get into this week's film discussion. It's Captain America, the First Avenger. It is 1942 and the world is at war. Steve Rogers wants to do his part and join America's armed forces, but the military rejects him because of his small stature. Finally, Steve gets his chance where he is accepted into an experimental program that turns him into a super soldier called Captain America. Joining forces with Bucky Barnes, Peggy Carter, and others, Captain America leads the fight against the Nazi-backed Hydra organization. Captain America, the First Avenger was released on July 22nd, 2011 by Marvel Studios and Paramount Pictures. This would be the final collaboration between Marvel and Paramount. It was directed by Joe Johnston. The screenplay was written by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, starring Chris Evans, Hugo Weaving, Haley Atwell, Sebastian Stan, Tommy Lee Jones, Dominic Cooper, Toby Jones, Neil McDonough, Stanley Tucci, and Derek Luke. The budget was $140 million. That is $191 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $371 million. That is $507 million adjusted for inflation. Tyler, why did you want to come on this week's episode to talk about Captain America, the First Avenger?
So this is a sequel to my infatuation with Tommy Lee Jones. I'm just going to do all your Tommy Lee Jones movies from here on out. But I think this, more than Iron Man, was an introduction to the Marvel movies for me. I did not make an effort to go and see Iron Man in the theater. I don't think I even really knew it was coming out. But this movie, having known Captain America from comics and some of the animated stuff when I was a kid, this was like must-see movie for me. I very vividly remember seeing this in the theater with a bunch of my friends. I remember, this being like, again, like the intro of a lot of these comic book things you didn't expect to see. Like, who would have thought, reading comics as a kid, that you'd see like Hydra in a movie, and that Hydra would continue to be like such a focal point of the MCU, at least Captain America, through the first couple of Captain America and Avengers movies and all that stuff. That was all awesome to me. Again, like the action, the background in this movie, the way they set it up. Pat and I touched on this a little bit before we got on the podcast, but the usage of these kind of big name actors in smaller parts, like Tommy Lee Jones in the midst of like No Country for Old Men and Men in Black 3 is in this movie and was kind of a bit part, and bring in some of that star power, which became kind of a key characteristic for a lot of these Marvel movies moving forward, where they would bring in somebody like that for kind of background or side piece role to establish this movie as something more than just like a, kind of unheard of Chris Evans. And I put heavy quotes on unheard of because obviously he had been the Human Torch in a previous Marvel movie, but seeing these guys come and put this character in place, I think is awesome. Later on, knowing that they were going to do some of the crazier storylines with Hydra, with the Civil War, all that stuff kind of based as the Captain America movie trilogy. I think Captain America is probably my favorite of all the Marvel characters. Again, just seeing this in live action with an actual person that wasn't there's Hunky movie. It was the first one was from the 70s, and then there was another one in the early 90s they tried to do. But seeing this character and seeing him like CGI'd as little Chris Evans, all that was just really cool to me. This is the start, I think, of my real enjoyment of these Marvel movies.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that you would instantly spring for this one when I sent you the short list of films that you wanted to cover. I knew you were a fan. We had always talked about Captain America, the series. I guess it's a trilogy, right? In the MCU, there's three of them, right?
Yep.
Although the third one's, you could argue, more of a Avengers movie than a Captain America movie, but it isn't name, of course. But this is the fifth entry in the MCU and part of what's known as Phase 1. It was released just 10 weeks after Thor, which we covered last season, Anton. But chronologically, I believe it's the first movie in the timeline of the MCU, as far as I know. I haven't seen the post-Avengers Endgame films, but as far as the Infinity Saga is concerned, it is chronologically the first one. As we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be covering more MCU films next season. And for the most part, we're trying to cover these in release order. We accidentally skipped over the Incredible Hulk because, well, frankly, it's just very forgettable. I literally forgot about it when I was including it in the list of MCU films to cover.
There's nothing that would make that movie better, unfortunately.
You know what? I don't know if I've seen it in its entirety. I don't remember much about it at all. So I am sort of looking forward to rewatching it, actually, believe it or not.
Yeah, we might be revealing a little too much about our thoughts on Incredible Hulk right now, but yes, it's
I couldn't
it was
tell you whether I
overlooked.
liked it or not. I don't know. I just don't remember anything about it. I know Edward Norton's in it, and that's about it.
It's been interesting to see them adapt some of those characters later on after
Abomination.
Abomination.
Oh, I was talking about the film.
Yeah, Thunderbolt. Oh, okay, yeah. Having Thunderbolt.
Oh yeah, that's
launched
right.
back.
What's his name? William Hurt. He popped up again a couple times in the series.
Yeah, and now he's Harrison Ford. So who knows?
Really?
Yep.
Oh yeah, because William Hurt has unfortunately passed away. R.I.P. Great actor. Tyler, you mentioned that Chris Evans was unheard of at the time. I mean, you're kind of right.
He was the Human Torch, and he was the bass player in Scott Pilgrim. The only two places where I would be able to place him before this.
He certainly wasn't a household name. This is the film that solidified him as a star. He had bounced around Hollywood a while before this. I think it's safe to say until this film came out, nobody took him seriously. He was never in like what you'd call a serious role. It was a lot of like CW quality stuff from what I have learned from looking at his IMDb filmography. Tyler, you mentioned there were previous attempts to adapt Captain America before this. The most famous one, it came out in 1990. To call it a failure would be an understatement. Now, admittedly, I have not seen it, but everything that I have read about it and that I have heard about it tells me that it had the quality of something you would see on like Mystery Science Theater. Anton, I'm sure you've seen it. So am I right?
Yes, you're right. It's not great.
But yeah, to your point, Tyler, people were really excited for this. Like a real proper Captain America movie. He is one of the most popular Marvel superheroes without question. But I would say at this point in the MCU, audiences were not really sure what to expect. Am I right, Anton? Iron Man had been great.
Yes.
The Incredible Hulk had bombed. Thor had done well, but again, that was pretty recent before this. And then, Iron Man 2, it made a lot more money than the first one, but it wasn't as well liked. So the MCU was still in its infancy. And Anton, would you say very much unproven, very much up in the air when this film was coming out?
I think it's important for listeners to also put in the headspace that Disney had just secured the acquisition for Marvel in 2009. So with that, there's a lot of speculation what's going to happen with the Marvel films, what direction are we going to see them in, this being the last in the Marvel Paramount collaboration. It was yes, like you said, there's a lot of speculation, still very unproven, but at the same time there was a lot of teasing into the future, and we're going to cover that a bit more. But yes, totally agree. Still very much unproven.
I missed this one in the theater, but I saw it before the Avengers came out in 2012. And I have to admit, I was actually pretty bored by this when I first saw it. I did not think much of it, which, we can get into that more when we discuss the film in detail, or in detail, I should say. Detail. I don't know what kind of old school way I'm talking in right now. But I think one of the reasons I actually was interested in seeing this for the first time is, believe it or not, the director, Joe Johnston. He is a name that I recognized. He isn't what you would call a critically acclaimed director, but I really have enjoyed several of his works, right? Like, I'm a big fan of The Rocketeer. Absolutely loved that movie as a kid. I still do. I think it holds up really well. I did like Jumanji. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is a really fun movie. And then October Sky, I thought was a really good movie. So he had a pretty good track record, I thought. I think he was an appropriate choice for this film. I can certainly understand why he was chosen. He has an interesting career. He wasn't always a director. You could describe him as like a disciple of George Lucas at one point. He had done stuff for Lucasfilm in the past. I didn't realize this until doing the research for this film. He is an Academy Award winner, not as a director, but he was a longtime employee of ILM. He was one of the co-winners of the Visual Effects Academy Award for Raiders of the Lost Ark. So pretty cool. Safe to say this film is, would you say, underappreciated?
I think that's a bit of an understatement. Definitely underappreciated.
It has an 80% Rotten Tomatoes score, but I think it is one of the lowest grossing films in the MCU library, and it does seem to be ranked quite low on Marvel rankings that I see. It was certainly overshadowed by the two sequels, right? The two sequels are thought of far better than this, but I think all of these reasons make it a great choice for why wasn't it better.
There we go, Pat. And I just want to throw out there, I want people to remember that we can go all the way as far back as 2001 for appearances by Chris Evans. He was the lead, or he was the male lead in Not Another Teen Movie as the character Jake.
There you go.
And if you ever want to see Chris Evans in very compromising situations, just watch that film. It's also quite a bit of a time capsule of the early 2000s, and honestly, I thought a great satire of teen just comedies, just smut films for that will be enjoyed by many people if you have not seen it. It is quite an interesting film, which they don't really make a lot of anymore.
No, those types of films have really gone out of favor.
Yeah.
The production history of Captain America, the First Avenger. As far back as 1997, Marvel Studios was being approached about making a Captain America film. Producers Mark Gordon and Gary Levinson, whose biggest project at that point had been co-producing Saving Private Ryan, were interested and they commissioned a screenplay. By 2000, they had secured financing to begin pre-production, but a lawsuit emerged concerning the rights to the Captain America character. It was settled by 2003, but by that point, the project had fallen through. Marvel was prepared to license the Captain America film rights to Warner Brothers, but in 2005, they received a $525 million investment from Merrill Lynch, allowing them to independently produce 10 films, including Captain America. Producers Kevin Feige and Avi Arad spoke publicly about the project, saying how some of it would be set during World War II and the other parts would be in the modern day, and Steve Rogers would be struggling to adapt to modern society. The original plan was for the film to be a standalone story, aiming for a summer 2008 release. Jon Favreau, of all people, was originally interested in directing before he ultimately chose the first Iron Man. I think that worked out well for him. By this point, the concept of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was being developed by Feige and others at the studio. David Self was hired to write a script, but the project was officially postponed as a result of the 2007/8 writer's strike. Anton, another victim, potentially up there with Quantum of Solace.
Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness they waited a little bit longer to make this one, unlike Quantum of Solace. Now, shortly after the highly successful release of Iron Man in May of 2008, Marvel announced that the working title, The First Avenger, Captain America, would be released in 2011. Louis Leterrier, director of The Incredible Hulk, had offered to direct, but Marvel turned him down. Not surprising because that movie stinks. Joe Johnston was officially hired as director in November 2008. He brought on Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely to rewrite the screenplay. This is worth pointing out because Marcus and McFeely would go on to write the screenplays for several more Marvel films. The next two Captain Americas, Thor: The Dark World, Infinity War, and Endgame. So it's safe to say they have done extremely well for themselves. There was apparently concern about anti-American sentiments having a negative impact on this film's box office potential. Now, later, after the election of President Barack Obama, Feige commented, quote, "The idea of change and hope has permeated the country regardless of politics, and that includes Hollywood. Discussions in all our development meetings include the zeitgeist and how it's changed in the last 2 weeks. Things are being adjusted," end quote.
I think that there's anti-American sentiment in a movie that's about fighting Nazis. What is anti-American? I guess I'm struggling to piece that together.
Well, I think more so anti-American sentiment from the masses that would consume the film, and that could also be impacted worldwide for the global box office. So the design as a whole tried to create technology that would be built in the 1940s, though with the added cube technology in Hydra's case. Abandoned Nazi projects or actual vehicles from the period were used as inspiration, and Daniel Simon, who was previously responsible for many vehicle designs in Tron Legacy, was appointed lead vehicle designer, and Garrett Hedlund was not found to have impacted this film negatively, so there's our only Tron Legacy and Garrett Hedlund connection. A creative decision was made not to have the title character fight Nazis in the film. It was felt that using Hydra as the main antagonist would make them be, quote, true to the comic book's many aspects. And we're sure, Pat, I'm sure the fact that they wanted to sell Hydra action figures had nothing to do with that decision.
No, I'm sure they didn't think about that at all, and how difficult it would be to sell action figures with swastikas on them.
But fun little Easter egg, a comic book could be found in the film of children looking at the comic book cover of Captain America punching Hitler in the face, which is actually a reference to the original comic that was released. So Captain America did punch a Nazi. It was because of this that Marcus and McFeely found sense in using the Cosmic Cube, already set up in Thor, as the film's MacGuffin, while using a younger Howard Stark as a key ally for the protagonists that would bring, according to Marcus, quote, that Tony Starkness, end quote. But what fans most cared about was, of course, who would be playing Steve Rogers. Ryan Philippe, Alexander Skarsgård, John Krasinski, Ryan McPartlin, Ethan Peck, Zachary Levi, Chase Crawford, Jensen Ackles, Garrett Hedlund, Wyatt Russell, Chris Pratt, and Dane Cook were reportedly all considered for the role. You can make a guess who I think would have been the black hole and would have probably halted the the MCU in its tracks had they chosen him for this role.
Dane Cook.
No, it's a close one, but there was
your favorite act. You're talking about your favorite actor, Garrett Hedlund.
I don't even want to imagine what it would have been like with Garrett Hedlund as Captain America. He was already so lifeless, and you know what? He would have been great in this scene where if they found Captain America stuck in ice, he would have excelled in that scene.
I think he could have played skinny Steve Rogers.
That's the fun part.
Little Stevie.
That was actually Garrett Hedlund's body that they put Chris's head on.
I'm really curious about this list when they say all of these actors were reportedly all considered. Like, what does considered mean? Does that just mean like the name got floated in a meeting, or they actually were calling their agent and were like, hey, we need you to come in for an audition?
I'm sure there's a little bit of everything when it comes to that.
Yeah.
There's always going to be fan speculation. It's interesting to see John Krasinski's name is here because he's also been tied to a lot of fan demand to be not only here, but also to play Mr. Fantastic. And there was enough of that he actually ended up playing Mr. Fantastic in the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness film as a bit of a Easter egg for fans for that particular casting.
Interesting.
It's definitely strange to see a lot of these names pop up in the MCU later. To see John Krasinski here, to see Chris Pratt here. Even Wyatt Russell, who is for a short, brief time, was the new Captain America in the Captain America TV show.
That's right.
So, yeah, definitely interesting to see a lot of these names circle back later on, even if the roles aren't as big or as in depth.
I would say also interesting to see Dane Cook, who I always have to be reminded that he was red hot in those 2000s.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't know if I believe that he was considered. Like, that would have been a disaster.
A comedic version of this movie would not have worked well.
No,
with him wisecracking jokes as he's punching Red Skull in the face would not have.
He would have been making Kool-Aid jokes the whole time.
Before I forget, John Krasinski, do you know about his other claim to fame almost for the MCU? The almost in his life that could have happened. Probably not, judging by the looks on your faces.
No, actually,
you do. I know you do.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I know. I should know this, but I can't think of it right now.
So I don't think she was his wife at the time, but Emily Blunt was, of course, originally cast as Black Widow, and she had to drop out because of a scheduling conflict. And that is how Scarlett Johansson got the role in Iron Man 2. So, but I don't think they were together at the time. I'm not sure, though.
They were not.
No. What could have been. I think it worked out well for everyone because she's had a great career since then, and Scarlett Johansson has as well. So I think everyone was happy, maybe.
But in March 2010, it was announced that Chris Evans was cast as Captain America and Hugo Weaving as the Red Skull. Sebastian Stan and Haley Atwell were announced soon after. Chris Evans declined the role 3 times before accepting, not out of dislike for the role, but because he feared what the effects of sudden increase of fame would be on his private life. Robert Downey Jr. convinced him to take the part and thus gained the freedom to sign on any other role he'd want afterwards. But with that, Chris Evans did sign a 6-picture deal with Marvel. Stanley Tucci took the role of Dr. Erskine, because the role enabled him to use a German accent, which he always wanted to do. Good for you, Stanley Tucci. The title was officially changed to Captain America: The First Avenger. Joss Whedon did a script polish as part of his deal to direct The Avengers, and filming began in July 2010 in London and other locations in the UK. War scenes were filmed in September at the former Royal Navy propellant factory in the Welsh village of Caerwent. The Northern Quarter in Manchester and the Stanley Dock area in Liverpool doubled for Manhattan's Lower East Side. And shoots also took place at our very favorite Pinewood Studios. We gotta tour that place. We gotta get some Pinewood Studios shirts.
I know. We need to do a pilgrimage.
And additionally, on top of that, there was also shooting at Shepperton Studios.
Look, now, we're big Shepperton fans here. We don't want to throw any shade at Shepperton, but it ain't no Pinewood.
Now, and we have quite a storied history with Pinewood on this show. So again, shouts out Pinewood. Hugo Weaving, who portrayed the Red Skull, wore a latex mask conceived by prosthetic makeup designer David White. The visual effects team had to manipulate his face considerably as the mask was bulky and they wanted to make it look like tight skin wrapped around a very bony structure. They thinned out Weaving's cheeks and lower lip, hollowed out his eyes, and removed his eyelashes and nose to make him appear more like the Red Skull character. While watching the film, if you see him scratch at his face, it is not a character tick, but Hugo Weaving being uncomfortable in his own skin. Now, Hugo Weaving has gone on record stating that he is indifferent to the film. He said that he was happy for the experience, but it was not the type of film that he normally preferred. He indicated to have very little interest in reprising his role as the Red Skull, also due to the difficulty of the makeup process involved. Indeed, when Red Skull reappeared in Avengers Infinity War, he was played by a different actor.
I'm sure the paycheck was pretty good.
Well, it wasn't good enough that he wanted to reappear for a short appearance, and I'm sure that would have gotten him an extra house in the Bahamas.
I'd like to think that his accent had something to do with that. Listening to him say, "Our victory is assured," it's just like seared into my mind.
My enemies.
Now, reshoots were conducted in April 2011, including the final scene, which was filmed in Times Square, and 13 effects companies worked on approximately 1,600 VFX shots. Now, most of the shots were done by a Los Angeles company called Lola that specializes in digital, quote, plastic surgery. So the technique involved shrinking Chris Evans in all dimensions. They shot each, quote, skinny Steve, unquote, scene at least 4 times. Once like a normal scene with Evans and his fellow actor and actresses in the scene, one with Evans alone in front of a green screen, so his element could be reduced digitally, again with everyone in the scene but with Evans absent, so that shrunken Steve could be reinserted into the scene. And finally, with a body double mimicking Evans' actions in case a second technique was required. When Evans had to interact with other characters in the scene, they had to lower him or raise the other actors and actresses on apple boxes or elevated walkways to make our favorite, skinny Steve, shorter in comparison. Now, for close-ups, Evans' fellow actors and actresses had to look at marks on his chin that represented where his eyes would be after the shrinking process, and Evans had to look at the marks on the top of the actor's head to represent their eyes. The second technique involved grafting Evans' head on the body double. This technique was used mostly when Evans was sitting or lying down, or when a minimum of physical acting was required. Now, shields made of different materials were used depending on what was needed for the shot. Rubber shields were used when Captain America punches people with it. For scenes where he put the shield on his back, magnets were used to keep it in place. In many of the scenes where he is seen throwing the shield, Chris Evans would mime out the actions of catching and throwing the shield, with the shield being added later using CGI. Paramount Pictures distributed the film, making this their final collaboration with Marvel before Disney bought the brand the following year. And so, with that, we are here to Captain America: The First Avenger. Why wasn't this film better?
I want to start by talking about the storytelling. I mentioned how I found this film boring upon initial viewing. My opinion of this has improved over time, but I was not the only person to find this boring. It's actually one of the common criticisms of this film, how we spend too much time with Rogers pre-super soldier serum. But I find the first act is very much needed. It's got a genuine humanity to it that's missing from, I think, some of the other films in the MCU. It reminds me a lot of the Richard Donner Superman film. I'm talking about the first Superman film, obviously, Anton. And, it presents Steve as like a genuinely good person who just wants to help people. The film kind of hits you over the head with it, but I think they do a very good job of establishing just how selfless and wholesome of a character that he is. The only thing preventing him from reaching his potential are like physical limitations, right?
Right.
This is an awesome payoff. They paid attention and made that a core part of the movie for 1,000 movies later when they get to Avengers Endgame and he picks up Mjolnir. Like the core character is such a solid, complete person that, he is more or less worthy. I think they did a great job laying all that out here without knowing that was the future, without knowing that was the path they were going to take.
But it doesn't make it any less jarring when you see Chris Evans' full-sized head on that body.
It is a little strange.
Yeah, I was going to say the effects on that they're okay. One of the things I appreciate about this film is how you can watch it almost as two different films. It's obviously a superhero flick, right? Like
right.
That's obvious, but you could also watch it as a war movie if you wanted to. And it's actually one of the reasons how I got my dad to watch it. Because, my dad has no interest in these films whatsoever. I'm like, well, it's like a World War II film. And he was like, oh, all right, I'll give that a whirl. And he did. Like, it's sort of like how you can watch Thor Ragnarok as just an MCU film or just as a straight up comedy if you want.
And in that sense, they did a great job of the film feeling nostalgic. You could see references to The Great Escape. It's definitely a very, very well done in terms of the time it was depicted in.
Yeah, there's a lot of Spielbergian nods. I would say you can really tell what the director Joe Johnston was going for, and I mentioned how I think he was a good choice for this film because of the setting, right? The old school setting to this. I think if there's one part of the storytelling that I felt was like a weak link, it was a little bit during the second act. The way that they write Rogers from going from basically a stage actor to like a crack commando. I do think it's a little one-dimensional. Like, yes, I understand he's been through basic training, but I would call that minimal training. He didn't have any combat experience other than the car chase in New York, right? He was courageous, but I felt that they made a fairly big leap with how he went from basically doing like the war bonds publicity stuff to I'm going to plan an entire assault on this compound. But I guess you could possibly just chalk that up to the super soldier serum, like giving this power to him.
I think it falls victim to the montage. I think they cover a lot of that in the montage, and then you're just expected to believe it later on. He's actively shutting down, was it like the 7 Hydra bases or whatever? And that's, I think, how he earns his reputation as the leader, doer, whatever.
There was a lot of montage in the film.
Yeah, they're not explicit with it, but you have to imagine he just gets there over those montage scenes.
Yeah, I did want to see a little bit more about how he developed his supreme level like of leadership and tactical knowledge. Like at one point he just starts telling Tommy Lee Jones's character what to do, pretty much. Like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to knock on the front door. We're going to knock out all these bases just because I say so, because I'm Captain America. But that was my question for both of you. The super soldier serum, I know it like, what's his name? Dr. Foreskin? Dr. Erskine? He basically says how it enhances everything that's already within you. Like if you're bad, it'll make you worse. If you're good, it'll make you, great, I guess. Does it also make you smarter? Does it enhance your intellect as well? It's obviously it enhances your physical strength and stamina and everything like that. Does it also enhance your brain power?
I'm trying to think of references even in the MCU. Like Wyatt Russell's character didn't seem to benefit.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's purely physical and that it's not a mental thing. Because even Erskine says it, he points at his chest and it's like it's in here. Your heart, your heart is the same. It just gets more active, but it's not a mental thing.
So I could see that more as of an implication from Erskine that if you're bad becoming worse, it's because you wield the power in an unjust way.
So what you're saying is it was a stupid question.
Not at all. I think a good one to that thankfully we have Marvel expert Tyler in the room, so we're good.
I did like the retro pulpy tone that this film has, and that's why I can forgive some of the montagey stuff. I think it's a pretty unique tone for the MCU. It's not just the setting, but I think it's the overall just look and feel that Johnston gives this film. Because you think about it, there's multiple ways that they could have gone about this film, right? They could have given it the gritty Band of Brothers look, but Johnston's direction, I think it's successful here because you get the sense that you're watching a comic book version of World War II.
it's really great to see Joe Johnston in directing this film for a couple reasons, right? You've already touched on it feels like pulpy. There's another film that he directed where you could see a lot of those same elements, The Rocketeer. Now that's like a deep cut. That's a deep cut Disney film for fans that'll recognize. That was also like very homage to film serials in like 1930s and 50s, and able to really capture that nostalgia and feel.
As a heads up to the listeners too, The Rocketeer has now made its way back to Disney Plus. You can actually watch it if you're interested in seeing some of the early Joe Johnston movies.
That movie's so much fun. There's a reason why I shouted it out in the intro. We're gonna cover it, Anton. It's on our list because it didn't make money when it came out. It's a real shame.
But it's a huge fan favorite. So
people love that movie, rightfully so. I did like the Raiders of the Lost Ark reference. I didn't pick up on that until probably, I don't know, the third time I watched this film, when it's right in the beginning of the movie. Johann Schmidt, of course, he's looking at the Tesseract, the cube, and he says, "And the Fuhrer digs for trinkets in the desert."
It's a fun little reference. There's another, of course, Indiana Jones reference with Toby Jones.
Eventually, yes.
Yes, eventually, right?
Yeah, that weird character in Indiana Jones, like shoehorned him into that film. And I had another question for you, comic book guys. So the Tesseract is the space stone, right? They don't say this in the film, of course, but it is eventually revealed to be one of the Infinity Stones, and it's the space stone. If it's so, and it basically has the ability to like teleport people between worlds, dimensions, whatever. But how does it create laser weapons?
They get into it in the movie. It acts as an energy source. It's the same thing in Avengers when Loki's using it to power the interdimensional, or not interdimensional, but the space portals. Yeah, the same idea is that they use it as a battery, and it can power all of those crazy guns and cannons and tanks and weapons that Red Skull and its minions create.
So it's like quite a bit more than just a space stone. Like that's what it ends up becoming, but it's like, it seems like it can do quite a bit.
Yeah, they get the ability to harness the energy it generates, and yes, it can probably generate enough energy that can transport people across space and time.
What did we think of the action in this film?
I thought the action was decent. I think that it was the choreography, some like very uneven sometimes, but there were particular scenes where definitely greater than others. But for the most part, I'd say one of the more inconsistent when it comes to the action scenes.
Something Marvel has leaned on really heavily in all these movies is the nameless, faceless villain. All the minions that they fight, these guys they have black masks on, they have goggles on. You cannot make any identifying features of these. In Avengers, it's the Chitauri. Again, like nameless, faceless villains. So just like you're endlessly battling these minions that you never get a face-to-face, look at. I understand why they do it. It's to make Red Skull seem more impressive and, I don't know, control's not the word, but to make him seem like he's a bigger villain than he is, that he controls these masses of nameless, faceless villains. But my issue is that, again, it's just like Captain America whooping on all these, like regular Joes across all of Germany and Europe. And it's just like, give him at least one challenge. Make him fight one big dude. Like, they have the big German dude in Indiana Jones. Why not have at least one big German dude in this movie who he gets into a struggle with?
I think there was on the other side of that, though, actually I really like Captain America's scenes where he's just demolishing folks. I think that was probably just to emphasize like this is a bigger than life kind of guy. So in that sense, I really did like how you could see like Captain America's super soldier serum really was working. But again, for the most part, I felt like otherwise the action kind of seemed a little inconsistent for me. What about you, Pat?
I think it was you already touched on some of it. It's generally well done, but there's a lot of the stormtrooper trope of he's like, you see Captain America just as a wrecking machine. He's just annihilating all these Hydra stormtroopers, basically, for lack of a better word, right? It's the same concept as Star Wars. Like, you don't feel anything when stormtroopers get shot. I think I would describe it as competent action. It's very like PG rated action. There's only one time in the film that I saw blood. It's when he kicks the one Hydra dude through the propeller of the plane. There's like red mist that flies out. It's really the only blood I think that I could recall in the film.
Is another feature of him smacking people in the face with a vibranium shield that you don't see their faces crumpling behind it. I guess it's easier on the CGI budget that way too.
Yeah, I think that is certainly one of the things that the second Captain America film improved upon. The Winter Soldier, I thought, had really good action. There were some really quite brutal fights in that film, if you recall. Like when in the intro, when he leads the raid on the ship, he has a really good fight with
Batroc the Leaper.
Right. That who's that? It was the MMA fighter, right? Yeah, like that's a really good fight. He has some really good fights with of course with the Winter Soldier in the film. So I think they maybe identified that early on, like we need to up the ante here on the action.
I just wanted to make a couple statements. One, not just a UFC fighter, one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighters of all time, George St. Pierre. So
I'm glad you said that because I knew he was like a big name, but I don't know anything about MMA, so I couldn't think of his name. But
he could be a listener of the show, and I just want to make sure that he knows we're giving the respect where it's due.
Well, we got both sides of that. Somehow I pull his comic name out of nowhere, and Anton pulls his real name out of nowhere. Yeah. So got all your bases covered here.
Best I can do is like he fights that guy on the ship who fights people in real life. I do love a good sneaking into the enemy base trope. This film does that a couple times, so I always enjoy that in a film. Any film that features sneaking into a base, I automatically have a little bit of a soft spot for. Roger Ebert said about this film, quote, "I got a sense of a broad story rather than the impression of a series of sensational set pieces. If Marvel is wise, it will take this and Iron Man as its templates," end quote. I think in some ways they did do that. I think in other ways they didn't. Like we talked about, they made a concerted effort to really, turn the dial up on the action. One of the things I really did like about the film was the look. I enjoyed the production design. I thought they absolutely nailed Captain America's outfit. Both of them, I mean, even the cart, like the cheesy one in the beginning, and then like the ultimate real suit that they give him. I think that could have very easily gone wrong, and they make it badass without it looking cheesy. With all the buckles and the armor, and they really did a good job with it.
So as a comic book fan, Tyler, I would also love to get your thoughts on this. One, looking at the cheesy costume, it does actually bring a lot of joy to my heart to see that because there's so much like great memories tied to that original design, and I'm sure every comic book fan loves to see that in real life. Even scenes of him stepping up to go do like the Bonds promotion, just looking at his boots and just seeing the style of the boots in real life was really exciting to see. And then looking at the design of his costume, or the actual design that he has going into battle, actually a lot during that time, a lot of the costume design was more so tied to his depiction in the Ultimates comic. So there was the Ultimate Marvel Universe line. So it wasn't just the more traditional Captain America that we get in the regular MCU, but an alternate universe part of the Ultimates line.
I'm a big fan of the background actors too. All the Howling Commandos resemble kind of like their comic book counterparts. Seeing Neil McDonough's character with the bowler hat and consistently following through with some of those guys. To see them so accurately captured from the comics and moved into live action, I think is awesome. Even if all those guys disappear after this movie, see them all in character in the movie, similar to what they wore and how they dressed inside the comics, was awesome.
On that note, I liked all the Hydra tech. I thought they did a good job with that. They really put thought into the retro look. And obviously, this is all fictional stuff, but it was believable, at least in the universe that they were trying to create. It did look like something that would exist in that time period if this had happened, right? And I think they were very wise to go to like Nazi experimental weapons designs and all just very thoughtful. And I think it translated well on screen. The best example of this, of course, is Red Skull's car. I got reminded, Anton, of Captain Nemo's car from League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Very nice.
If I understand it correctly, they used a real car for that. And
They did.
Yeah, I have it here in the notes. So it was built from scratch over a modified truck chassis. It was 25 feet long, 8 feet wide. Its design was inspired by the Mercedes 540K and the Mercedes G4, and it included an exposed supercharger between the front wheels. The car had 700 horsepower just to move it. It was a Drexler engine. Pretty cool.
And even looking at a Mercedes 540K, it looks like a menacing Nazi-esque car.
They did it right, the designs. I think we talked about the effects already a little bit. I don't want to harp too much on it. It's the Skinny Steve stuff. It's okay. I think it works in some shots, and in other shots where he's moving around, it's kind of clunky. And then something else that I was reading in the research. So they converted this to 3D in post-production, and it got a lot of criticism upon release. And, like I mentioned, I didn't see this in the theater, so I didn't get to see that, thankfully. But I do find it interesting rewatching this. You can tell there's a handful of shots that were almost certainly specifically designed for the 3D format. There's the one shot of him during one of the montages where he's throwing a shield and it's like going into the camera. And it looks a little flat, just stuff here and there. It's not like that goofy ass frame rate that Peter Jackson used on the Hobbit trilogy, where it was just almost entire sequences just look like video games. It wasn't that clunky, but
you always got to appreciate when they actually had Haley Atwell shoot a real gun at Chris Evans to test out the shield. I appreciate that.
It's commitment.
Yeah, of all the craze over 3D movies back in the day, it's crazy to think that nobody picked up on it. I think, Pat, you might have been the only person I knew with a 3D TV, and it's not like you ever used it for 3D. It's a hassle. You had to borrow glasses from the movie theater to have enough so that everybody in the room could watch, and it was difficult to locate any of them that weren't like a Blu-ray that you had to buy or rent. There's just no good digital way to consume, or at least not back then, a 3D movie. And even now, it's just kind of a movie theater gimmick that doesn't ever translate outside of the movie theater.
No. Playing Call of Duty in 3D was pretty cool, though, I have to say. Sometimes.
Make me nauseous.
Yeah, it's just how long do you want to have the glasses on when you're playing a video game? It's like it just becomes cumbersome after a while. It was a novelty thing, nothing more. I think we're probably all in agreement on this. For some movies, it works really well. Like every once in a while, you get an Avatar. Like when the second Avatar came out, I was like, yeah, I'll see that in 3D in the theaters. But most films, I don't know. It's just not a thing that sticks. I really like the score by Alan Silvestri. I think it's got a real nice John Williams-y sound to it, and I mean that in a good way. One thing I noticed, I listened to the score the other day to prepare for this podcast, and a lot of the themes that Silvestri uses here would surface again in the future Avengers films, which is really cool. So, it's funny, Roger Ebert was talking about this film being used as a template for future Marvel movies. Like, well, the score absolutely was. Silvestri is a very famous, accomplished film composer. I would say these films and something like Forrest Gump, Back to the Future, that's probably his best known work. But he's a big time name. And it's one of the best things about this film for me. It's the score.
It's interesting because, I agree with you, Pat. I do really love the score, but there has been analysis of scores. The score for the Avengers film, it actually is a little polarizing. I think that's something maybe we can visit in a future podcast episode. But I totally agree with you here. Like, I really enjoyed the score for the film.
I did not know that it's polarizing in future films. That's interesting. I always liked the scores for those movies. I thought they were good.
Well, we'll chat more on it. And I thought like the points made were very interesting in terms of what is a purposeful and intentional film score and how does the Avengers score compare to other memorable historic scores. But again, I think that's probably better suited for a conversation about one of the Avengers films.
Well, we're covering at least one Avengers film, so we can get into that one. We're going to cover Age of Ultron, Tyler.
Yes, we are.
A good one
which
to pick
is
up on.
Nobody's favorite.
Tough to watch.
You know what? I saw it once. It's just one of those ones, Anton, where I don't remember a ton about it. I remember James Spader being enjoyable as the villain, but it did feel like a side quest at the time.
There's like a whole scene where they just get a bunch of old people drunk on Thor's God Realm, and then they're all just hammered. That's the Stan Lee cameo. It's just a drunk old war vet. It's such a strange scene.
I was hyped up for the film, and the trailer also had the very cryptic portion where Ultron actually sings that song from the Pinocchio movie, Got No Strings on Me. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great, but it wasn't. But
well, also, I mean, we don't have to step on that film too much, but there's something disconcerting when you're going to see it and you see like 2 hours and 35 minutes. You're just like, oh no. This film is like what, 2 hours? Like, this is fine. It's maybe a little long, but it's fine. They nailed the ending to this. This has one of my favorite movie endings of this era. He wakes up to the real baseball game, I should say, but they're playing it fictitiously. He realizes it's all fake. He runs out into Times Square. It's great stuff. It's a great way to end a film.
I like the beat. They end the movie with him crashing, and then there's that, they do the little thing where it's Stark Senior going through and finding the cube and all that stuff, and then there's black screen for a second, and then they jump right up to current day Captain America. And I think it's all really, really well done with the kind of brief tease into the future.
I think we can get into the second reason why this wasn't better, which is the cast. We can start with Chris Evans, the star of the show. I really think he did a great job. Again, before this movie, I only knew him from that terrible Fantastic Four film. So I was like, really? Him? This guy? We said it in the intro. Nobody really took him seriously before this film. He became a huge star. I'm glad he listened to Robert Downey Jr. He does such a great job of selling the innocence of the character, but it's somehow not corny. And that is very difficult to pull off. He plays the earnestness of the character completely straight. There's no sarcasm. I think it was a very intelligent decision on his part and the part of the writers. They could have taken this one way and made him a bit of a sarcastic character. They're like, well, it worked for Tony Stark. Maybe it'll work this way too. But he plays it completely straight, and you root for him pretty much immediately. And considering Captain America, I would say at face value is a fairly boring character, right? He doesn't really have any character flaws. He doesn't have any demons. He doesn't have any vices. He doesn't have a huge arc, I would say, at least not in this film. He would in later films. He becomes super powerful here. And I think Evans is tremendous in this film. They absolutely picked the right actor for this.
Can't leave out the physicality either. After we get rid of little Steve, we get Big Steve. And the amount of steroids and HGH this dude must have been taking to get to look like that it's impressive. That is commitment to the role.
Yeah, the super soldier serum was actually just HGH.
And canola oil. He does a great job. I like Haley Atwell in this film. Her character was apparently so popular that they gave her own TV series, yeah. which I never saw. I know it didn't last particularly long, but
one season, and of all the Marvel material, it is not the worst. I'll give it that.
And Peggy Carter, of course, is a beloved character, as you mentioned, Pat, in the MCU. Again, referencing Multiverse of Madness, there was an alternate version of Captain America where Peggy Carter dons the Captain America shield as Captain Carter in the film. So again, another reference to the Multiverse of Madness.
I can't wait to watch that. And then, I guess we should mention it, like the chemistry that Chris Evans and Haley Atwell have. You're really just rooting for them. Like from the moment they first meet, you're like, wow, I really hope they end up together, and they don't. It's sad.
Not here. The fact that they give this a solid follow through in the Endgame is definitely a testament to how important the Captain Carter or Sharon Carter's character is throughout all this. That she does get that follow through with Steve at the end.
Sebastian Stan, he did a lot of CW quality stuff before this too. I like him in the role. I like his brotherly relationship that he has with Steve.
This Sebastian Stan stuff. My first introduction in was in Hot Tub Time Machine. He's like one of the ski patrol guys. Yeah. And he's like hardcore anti-Russian because they have the energy drink. And to see him turn later into a Russian machine is a great follow through of that character's initial suspicions.
What TV show was he on that it was a popular show, right? Was it like the OC or it was one of those shows, right?
So
I probably just should have written that down, but I didn't.
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but
Google
I know
says
that
Gossip Girl.
Oh yeah, there you go, Gossip Girl. Yep, that's it. I know it was something like that.
Sebastian Stan has had a bit of a career for himself since playing Bucky Barnes in the MCU. Been in a lot of lead roles, and there was that Hulu series 2 years ago now at this point, Pam and Tommy, where he plays Tommy Lee.
Right.
A sneaky, interesting, and good series. I very much enjoyed that, especially Seth Rogen's character. All that was pretty good.
Speaking of Tommy Lee, Tyler, your love for Tommy Lee Jones. I think he does a fantastic job in this film of playing Tommy Lee Jones. But this is what he was hired for. They're like, Tommy Lee Jones, play yourself. you're probably going to be on set for no more than a week.
It's like the same grumpy character in Men in Black, the same grumpy character in No Country for Old Men, the same grumpy character he plays over and over again. And it's, again, I talked about it, like pulling in these marquee names for these kind of bit roles in these movies is what makes them, I think, good. I think it adds some depth and gravity to these movies that you wouldn't get otherwise. And he's perfect for this role, and I'm glad they pulled him into it.
Another parallel to that, on that same note, Anthony Hopkins being in Thor. I remember we were saying, Pat, it almost seemed like, is this really the best use of Anthony Hopkins' time? But I think it was a smart move because it did add gravity to the film with just Anthony, even if Anthony Hopkins is phoning it in. So again, totally agree, Tyler. Tommy Lee Jones is fantastic in the role.
Yeah, they give him scenes to use his skills, like the scene where he basically interrogates Toby Jones's character, another great character actor, right? Zola is the character's name. He just eats the steak in front of him. It's just good Tommy Lee Jones stuff. Then he gets some good lines when he's just like, what is that? And he's like, cow. What's in it? Cow. And then when they're raiding the compound later and the Hydra guy is giving his line about blah, 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 if you kill me, 2 more. He's like, great, let's go find 2 more. It's good stuff.
A few minutes after that, when Captain America and Sharon Carter kiss, and he looks at him and he goes, don't look at me, I'm not going to kiss you. And he just like kind of kicks him off with the car. I think that's all a great scene.
And then, of course, shout out to my favorite character actor, Stanley Tucci. A small role, but an important role as Dr. Abraham Erskine. He's a great actor. It's, again, the same concept with Tommy Lee Jones. They're like, well, this is a pretty insignificant role in the grand scheme of things. Let's just hire the best actor we can for the role. Good decision on their part. Same thing with Toby Jones, right? He is probably not a name that the average moviegoer is familiar with, but he is certainly a face that most people will recognize. He is a great actor. He's in a ton of stuff. It's a great use of his character. Same thing with Dominic Cooper as Howard Stark, right? It's a smaller role, but an important role, a hugely important character in terms of what the MCU would end up becoming. I think you can see some similarities between him and Robert Downey as Tony in the later films. The playboy aspect of it, I think he got that right. The rest of the supporting characters, I think they're fine. I have them as like they're a bit, they feel like stereotypes. But to your point, Tyler, I'm not familiar with the source material like you are. And you said this is a pretty accurate portrayal of the Howling Commandos. So that's certainly cool to hear that.
Yeah, they're definitely background guys. They get a little bit more of their personality fleshed out in the comics. But here, just seeing, again, they get that few lines in, gives a good indication of who they are. And again, they're all very agreeable to going back to the front and basically fighting with Captain America because he's leading. He's the one in front, leading the charge every time. And I think it's definitely cool to see them portrayed the way they are.
For all the pulp in this movie, Anton, there are some genuinely emotional moments in this film that I think are quite effective. Bucky's fall is crushing. I did not know this was going to happen when I first saw the film. I just assumed Captain America, of course, he's going to save his friend. I didn't know what the Winter Soldier was. I didn't know where that was going to go. So when he falls and I thought he was dead, I was just like, oh, wow. I did not expect that at all.
Totally agree. And even being a comic book fan, we touched on this earlier, because there was still a lot of unknowns. There was still a lot of speculation. Is there going to be a Winter Soldier? Because that was actually a fairly recent storyline in the comics that could have been integrated, could have not been integrated. So the fact that they decided to go in that direction has been great, of course, especially seeing what Sebastian Stan did with the character. But yeah, just seeing that moment in the film was definitely very crushing. And that is a testament to the great job that Sebastian Stan and Chris Evans had great chemistry on screen.
And then at the end, when Steve and Peggy are talking to each other over the radio, and you realize what Steve's going to do, he's going to basically crash the plane. It's really good acting. It's really well written. It's really touching. If you don't at least feel something during this scene, I can't help you.
I do enjoy that it's written and portrayed from Peggy's perspective. Like, they don't need to show Steve, crashing and becoming an icicle. They're pretty good about, showing the emotion from Peggy's side and the stakes, what she's losing and how she's losing it.
So, Pat, you're saying if you need a soul because you don't get misty-eyed watching the scene, go get yourself a soul stone because you're going to need one.
Good one. Yeah. I almost got misty-eyed during the scene. It hits hard. Like, it's a really well executed scene. It's written in a way that it could be corny, but it's not. It just works. The score, it's real subtle. Everything about the scene just works. Give Joe Johnston a lot of credit for that, because that is absolutely a scene that could have been disastrous.
Very well done. You want to root for them. And like you said, Tyler, that payoff in Endgame makes it all that much more satisfying.
I think that's the very last shot in Endgame, right? It's just them dancing in the flashback, right? Yeah, it's good stuff. You know, for any criticism directed towards these films from a director that we won't name, who called it not cinema, you know who I'm talking about. It's like I don't think you saw it. Like, did you watch the films? Like, there's some real drama in this stuff.
People want to hate.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about Red Skull yet, the villain in the film, Hugo Weaving. Pretty famous actor. I actually think this is one of my quibbles with the film. I think his performance is fine. You know, Hugo Weaving, like, he's never going to suck as a villain, right? Like, he's played one of the all-time great villains in movie history with Agent Smith in The Matrix, right? So you know he's gonna be a fine villain. Outside of Loki, I don't know if phase 1 of the MCU had a great villain for me. Like, Loki is clearly the winner here. I think Jeff Bridges was good as Obadiah Stane, but for the first half of Iron Man, you don't realize he's the villain. I mean, you guys probably did because you're familiar with the material. I didn't. Weaving here, he only has a handful of scenes. The best one is the confrontation at the factory when Rogers finally learns what he's up against. I think it's a pretty one-dimensional role. I don't know how much Weaving could have done with it. My issue is that they don't fight at all. I was just waiting for this like knockdown great fight at the end on the plane, and they just exchange a few words, and then he activates the Tesseract and just disappears, and it felt anticlimactic to me. So it's not necessarily Weaving's fault that I have an issue with this. It's just how they wrote it. I think there was stuff missing here.
I think it's tough to compare him to Agent Smith. I think that's such a complete villain performance that seeing him as a villain again in a somewhat close timeline, it's strange. He just doesn't have the same background, the same menacing as where he gets from Agent Smith. And similarly, too, I mean, the other villains in Phase 1 are not strong, you're right. But I will say, if you don't think Anton Vanko is the best villain ever, or Ivan Vanko, spending 30 minutes of the movie talking about his bird.
You lose! You lose, Stark! Yeah. Or Tyler and I used to joke about this, Anton, when Vanko, when his father dies in the beginning, and he just drinks the vodka, and he's like, ah!
He's less villainly, but Justin Hammer is another kind of pseudo great villain just because of how goofy he is throughout, and then
funny,
starting,
but not threatening.
Starting to pop back up in some of these Marvel things again. It's definitely cool to see him back.
With Red Skull, can you give me a 30-second fight? They're both super soldiers. Like, can I see the two super soldiers fight each other? Is that too much to ask for? Apparently, it is.
At that point, there should be two regular guys beating on each other because they're, from what I understand, evenly matched. It's not like Captain America smacking around a bunch of Hydra guys with the shield. You're not going to get the same impact when they're evenly matched fighting each other, when there's a disadvantage between the hero and the villain.
I would have loved to have seen it. That's my point.
And something probably that's more unique to the comics is when you have different writers depicting the Red Skull, sometimes you lean more heavily to his Nazi background, or you lean more heavily towards his more egocentric tendencies. I feel like this particular depiction was a more cool and calculated, domineering Red Skull. And sometimes, like from the comics, I feel like the more over-the-top Red Skull felt like that could have been a really interesting take. At the end of the day, like we got Hugo Weaving. He's a great actor, but I'd be curious to see if we do see a Red Skull ever again in a future Marvel release. How do they depict it? Because Tyler, would love to know your thoughts. Do you feel like there could have been a different direction that would have benefited for the Red Skull here?
They don't get into it a whole lot, but like the head of Hydra thing, like him leading this fanatical organization, I think was downplayed a bunch in this movie. I think him being the kind of heretical, it's like anti-Hitler basically. He's even more into the occult than Hitler is. He's even taking advantage of some of these things. It's just, I think it could have been played maybe less seriously and more fanatical. Again, his intro in the movie is kind of weird too. With him kind of showing up at this church. There's a lot of Marvel lore packed into that initial scene, which I think maybe distracted me when they bring in like Idrisil and the tree and all that stuff. And a lot of that, me as a comic book fan, I look past it. Well, I look past past Red Skull, coming in and kind of blowing a church up and shooting the guy running the church. But I think they could have made a more evil introduction for Red Skull to make it clear that he is a serious contender for a big time villain. Instead of him just shooting 3 Nazis and that being the end of like any Nazi intonations in this movie. Ham it up, play it up with him being an actual Nazi, but being even more fanatical than most of the other Nazis are, I think would have been a better fit for this movie.
No, I agree with that. But at the end of the day, like, we got what we got, and even then, to go back to how different writers depict the Red Skull, we didn't even get at least we didn't get the worst one. Pat, I know you don't read comics yourself, but just to share, I think one of the worst Red Skull depictions in the Ultimate Marvel, I've mentioned them before, Ultimate Marvel line of comics, they actually featured a Red Skull who was the illegitimate son of Steve Rogers and had dedicated his life to being so rebellious to be the anti-Steve Rogers, and that is what drove that Red Skull in the Ultimate Marvel line. There's a lot more there. There's a lot of questions about the Ultimate Marvel series. There's been a lot taken from Ultimate Marvel and put into the film, into the MCU, particularly the idea of Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. But that is one idea about the Red Skull that I'm glad they didn't take.
Yeah, I don't think I need to hear any more about that. Yeah, it seemed like they were aiming to bring Red Skull back, right? Because they make a point not to kill him. He just vanishes into the portal without really doing too much. They, of course, sort of brought him back in Endgame, albeit with a different actor.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it at the time, but they brought Zola back in a digitized form. I am not a recording, Fräulein. Oh, by the way, we have to cover Winter Soldier now, because this person will remain nameless, but someone who has appeared on this podcast has a problem with that movie and wants to talk about it.
Well,
I'm interested.
Just based on a lot of preconceived notions, I think I know who this person is. But okay. I did want to say, I think that would be another fun episode for our eventual Patreon release.
I'm with you.
All right. Yeah. So we're teasing it again, folks. Patreon, get ready.
It's coming in some form eventually in the future.
On Patreon.
Yeah, we'll tweet about that or talk about it on the podcast. Nobody reads our tweets anyway. It's fine. Well, I don't have any other reasons for this film. It's time to wrap this up, unless either of you have anything to add before we conclude Captain America, the First Avenger. Nope, shaking your heads. Okay.
I could do this all day.
I was waiting for someone to say that. Thank you. Tyler, as you're the guest, would you like to go first and render your verdict on this film?
Absolutely. I'll start out with my rating. This is an A- for me. This was a solid introduction of a comic book character that is a core Avenger in these Avengers movies. It's definitely different from some of the depictions I've read through in the comics over the years. It's a strong, again, phase 1 movie where they're setting a lot of stuff up. Pat, you mentioned this a few times that you thought the movie was a little slow, but they are laying a ton of groundwork in this movie, more so than they did in the other phase 1 movies. You don't see a lot of the groundwork laid out. In Iron Man, you see a bit of his motivations and why he's doing what he's doing, but they don't get into the larger scheme of things. Iron Man 2 is a similar thing. It's an Iron Man-centric movie. There's not a lot of outside the boundaries kind of things. They're not talking about consistent villains or anything like that. Thor, similarly, is a very isolated and solo movie. There's not a whole lot of extra stuff going on. Sure, they introduce some characters that come back later on, but a lot of the themes are not, carried through into the other movies. Captain America, the First Avenger, very much works as an introduction to the Avengers. You get an understanding of Captain America as a whole. You get an understanding of Captain America and why he leads the Avengers and why he's the heart and soul, because he's just a serious, I don't know how to say it besides ass kicker, basically. He's going into the front, he's leading, he's organizing, he's telling people what to do, and formulating plans, and you see all that kind of turn around and come out in the Avengers when he's leading that core team of, again, super-powered individuals who basically don't have any reason to trust Steve Rogers. He's just a guy. A lot of this, again, carries on, and you see Captain America through 2 other solo movies and all these other Avengers movies kind of become the core piece of all Avengers stuff. And I think that's one of my biggest disappointments, is that he semi-retired himself from these future movies, because he could have carried this on, I think, for a while longer. I think the expansion of the Captain America mantle to a bunch of different people has maybe not diluted it, but had made it a little less serious. With the Captain America TV show, they go into how there was a separate Captain America and then there's the new Captain America, and then they hand the mantle off again. It just kind of it doesn't make it so that the Captain America mantle is as important as it is. But again, this movie does a lot of the base layer stuff. It sets up a lot of the motivations. It sets up some of the big villains with Hydra. And again, just the casting for me, Chris Evans is an awesome Captain America. He fits the bill. We talked about it, the mentality, the kind of physicality of it, the idea that he's like this pure individual doing things for the purest of reasons is all kind of generated out of this movie. And it definitely, again, is the one that pulled me into this the most. You can, for me at least, kind of write off Iron Man and Thor as not great movies. You can definitely write off The Incredible Hulk as a not great movie. This is the one that had the most impact. And of all the Marvel movies, this is without a doubt the one I've seen the most. I'm thinking I've probably seen this at least 20 times, start to finish. So it's definitely a great movie. It's definitely a solid piece for me. I'm an A- just because of, again, where this is placed amongst all of the Marvel movies. It's one of the core bedrock pieces of setting up the whole universe where we've gotten to 20-something movies later now.
I love it. I love the enthusiasm for this. Anton, you feeling like going second, or you want to wait?
Oh, I'm happy to go next.
Okay.
So it is. So one, I have to give a shout out to my wife because Captain America is her favorite superhero and also favorite hero in the MCU. And just wanted to give that shout out because she really helped me to appreciate the character. Now, growing up, I have to admit Captain America was not my favorite superhero. Growing up, this might make me might make me see him in a different shade to once listeners hear it, but I was a bit more of a DC fan growing up. At the same time, I still knew what Captain America meant to Marvel. And Captain America is huge, right? He's a leader of the Avengers. And when you have Captain America, the first Avenger, coming out, you have to get it right. This is going to be the guy that's going to be on the cover of your future movie posters. This is going to be leading the team. You have to get it right. And I love that while the film has a bit of a dated look in some portions, it absolutely nails it otherwise. And I feel like it was a really fun, nostalgic film that really presented us with the origin story for Captain Marvel in a very sincere and heartfelt way that really kept me captivated and engaged, and really did do a fantastic job again of giving us our Captain America. Chris Evans did a fantastic job in the role, and I'm thankful that they were able to really add in the right amount of heart and sincerity that we need for the character. So overall, I was very happy with the film. I really appreciated just all the different touches to really give it that feel of nostalgia. So overall, it was fantastic rewatching it again because it had been a bit of time since I rewatched it, but I really appreciated watching it again, and I definitely enjoy this film and think it was I think that it was a good film and one that maybe history should look at a bit more favorably. For me, this film is a solid B.
I had not seen this in a while. I very much enjoyed rewatching it. Tyler, I did mention how the first time I saw it, I found it a bit boring. I don't feel that way anymore. The more I see this, the more I like it. Any World War II setting for a superhero film would at least interest me, and the setting makes it pretty unique against the other MCU films. I do think it is the weakest of the three Captain America films, but that's only because the other two are so strong. At this point, I do think this film is underappreciated. It's underrated. It gets dismissed quite often, and I think it deserves a second look from anyone who wants to rewatch these MCU films, especially the early ones. It's a great introduction for Steve Rogers. The story is very simple, but it has a lot of heart to it. Chris Evans is tremendous in the role. The rest of the cast is great. Even Hugo Weaving, who apparently didn't want to be here, although I was very disappointed in the Red Skull as a villain. He's a very famous Marvel villain, and I don't think they did much with him. But Evans has real chemistry with Haley Atwell. That is the beating heart of the film, right? The core heroes. And they did a great job with this. Joe Johnston was the right director. I love the retro vibe. I love the old-fashioned Rocketeer just vibe that he gives this film, even though some of the action, it's a bit pedestrian, but it's at least well executed. I love the score. For what it's worth, I think the Captain America trilogy is the best in the MCU. The First Avenger, we get our first look at the Infinity Stones, right? Although we didn't know it. I mean, I didn't know it at the time. The Winter Soldier, we learn how S.H.I.E.L.D. gets infiltrated by Hydra, and that sets things up for the breakup of the Avengers in Civil War, right? And then Thanos is what gets introduced to us in those movies, too. So we get this nice story arc across these first 3 films. And Anton, you mentioned they had to get this right. They did get this right. I really, really like this film, and I would give this a B+. I was actually surprised at how much I enjoyed it on the rewatch. It's definitely a movie I would watch again. I can't say that about all the MCU films. And that's it for Captain America, the First Avenger. Tyler, once again, thanks for joining. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me, guys. I love talking about these Marvel movies.
And well, we're covering quite a bit of them, so we will definitely have you on again. I don't know what the next film you're going to be on with us is. Have we talked about it already?
I don't think
If so, I apologize.
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well,
eagerly anticipating tapping in again.
Excellent. Well, we will have you back soon then. And with that being said, that's it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? Anton, we are almost done with season 3. We have just one more film to cover this season, and it is a big one.
It is a big one. And touching on that, what a season has it been? I'm really excited to do the recap episode because it has been a huge season, a lot of growth, amazing guests, Tyler, of course, included. But yeah, we're going to end this season strong, aren't we?
We are. It's going to be Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
So get excited for that, folks, and we'll see what kind of high ground we take when talking about this film.
We'll see how the character arc of the Nemoidians gets resolved, because that's what I care about.
It's certain to be a sizzler, if you catch my drift.
I do. Tyler, where are you at on Revenge of the Sith?
The best of the 3 prequels for me, probably only because of the music and the fight scene at the end.
No other reason?
None whatsoever. But watching 2 guys swing lightsabers in that carefully choreographed fight is pretty awesome. And then the Duel of the Fates, just like I hear that when I'm driving sometimes, doing my erratic driving. It fuels me.
What would you give that on a rating scale?
It's a B.
Whoa.
It's a B for me, yeah.
Oh, you should listen to our episode then.
That's a high one.
Yeah, that's way too high.
Yeah, it's the highest I would rate any of the prequels. But it was such a solid movie for me when I was a kid. It had all the things you want to see. Palpatine and Yoda fighting and a bunch of weird set pieces that all ended up looking really cool.
It has C-3PO lighting up, or it has R2-D2 lighting up some droids.
Ugh.
Literally catching them on fire.
Yeah, it does.
That's a bit of a teaser for Revenge of the Sith. So
hope I'm not giving too much away. Anyway, we will see you next week on Why Wasn't It Better when we talk about Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. See you then.